I think that it goes without saying that I've already established myself as a die-hard Imperium loyalist. However, I can't deny that looking into other factions in the world of Warhammer sometimes feels like a breath of fresh air. That is why I found myself looking into the Tau, which arguably have some of the coolest art and models of this vast universe. I began my research completely clueless about the Tau, and I've ended with a newfound fascination and admiration for the unique perspective that the Tau offer. Surprisingly, for being the youngest faction in the lore, the stories of the Tau are incredible in their scale and detail. Today, I am excited to bring you a complete overview of their history, along with an exploration of the psyche of the species that have been forced into an eternal conflict by what seems to be happenstance, and yet, following the trail leads one into a grander conspiracy. Finally, before we begin, I'd like to quickly mention that you can find digital downloads of my wallpapers on my Ko-fi store. Please also remember to like, subscribe, and check out the links below. Now, with the formalities out of the way, let's begin. Far out upon the eastern fringe of Imperial space lies a small world. It has been the scene of strife and great conflict in its time, and has also served as the cradle of a civilization that even now bears its light ever further into the darkness between the stars. This planet, known as Tau, is the origin point of a people who walked the razor's edge of self-destruction, only to be pulled back from the brink by a miracle, remade, and set upon a new path of inexorable advancement. A tale of an empire forged in the crucible of unification. The location of the Tau homeworld on the far eastern fringe of the galaxy proved to be a decisive factor in their survival and evolution. This isolation, a cosmic accident of geography, granted the nascent species a rare and precious gift in a hostile universe, the gift of time. Shielded from the great, expansionist powers by sheer distance and tempestuous warp storms, the Tau were allowed to develop undisturbed, a circumstance that spared them from the xenophobic purges that befell so many other primitive races. It was in this secluded corner of space that their journey could begin without interference. The planet Tau is a small world, dominated by a single continental landmass, and graced by a swift and magnificent sunrise. Upon the sweeping savanna plains that cover much of its surface, the Tau took their first steps. They progressed from primitives to herder tribes inhabiting the savanna plains, unified by the shared challenges of their environment. They were a hardy and determined people, taking root in their harsh but beautiful world. This primitive unity, however, was not destined to last. As their society advanced and their numbers grew, the seeds of divergence were sown, foreshadowing an era of strife that would tear their people apart. For the early Tau, societal advancement was a grim irony. The very adaptations that allowed them to master their world also fractured their people. As they spread across the continent, the Tau had long been diverging both physically and mentally, their bodies and cultures molding to suit new environments and new roles. This specialization did not lead to a golden age of prosperity, but instead laid the foundation for bitter internal conflict. Distinct tribal groups emerged, each physically and mentally entrenched in their purpose. There were the strong and warlike plains dwellers, whose lives were defined by conflict and survival on the open savannas. From the mountains came the nimble mountain settlers, adapted to a life of verticality and rugged terrain. In other regions, loquacious merchants and diplomats arose, their minds sharpened for trade and negotiation, and from the high peaks, winged messengers took to the skies, their bodies evolved for flight. The Tau were a species physically reshaping itself to fulfill specific functions, a fateful precursor to the rigid social order that was to come. What began as a triumph of adaptation soon curdled into a catalyst for war. The specialized tribes, once parts of a whole, now saw each other as rivals, setting the stage for an age of savage civil war known as the Montau, or the Terror. The era of the Montau represents the absolute nadir of the Tau species, a foundational trauma that haunts their collective history. It speaks to a darkness within their collective psyche, whose resurgence they will always dread. This was a time when the Tau turned upon themselves with a ferocity that threatened to drive their entire race to extinction, a dark age of conflict that nearly consumed them before their story could truly begin. As their society fractured, tribal alliances formed and gunpowder weapons proliferated across the continental landmass. The specialized tribes, once a source of strength, now engaged in endemic warfare. The warlike plains dwellers turned their strength against the nimble mountain settlers, and the diplomats' words gave way to the crack of rifles. It was a conflict destined to drive the Tau to extinction, a species-wide civil war that placed them firmly on a path to total self-annihilation. At their darkest hour, when all hope seemed lost and their world was drenched in the blood of their own kind, a pivotal and almost mythological event occurred. An intervention so sudden and absolute that it would forever alter the destiny of their race. The arrival of the ethereals remains one of the greatest mysteries in the history of the Tau. As observers beyond their empire note, the more you consider it, the more it makes so little logical sense as to be dismissed with or without evidence. As if from nowhere, a new caste appeared. With only their words, these serene figures brought an end to savage conflicts that had raged for generations with no sign of abating. Their sudden appearance and the totality of their influence have led many to speculate about their true origins, questioning if their rise was truly a natural event or the result of some unseen manipulation. Possessed of an unyielding dignity and serene confidence, the figures who would become known as the ethereal caste moved among the warring tribes. Where once there was only bitterness and bloodshed, they brought peace. The transformation was absolute, and by all accounts, occurred virtually overnight. The tribes laid down their arms, the alliances dissolved, and the entire race was unified under the guidance of these mysterious newcomers. The speed and completeness of this change defied all explanation. The ethereals fundamentally remade Tau civilization. Their arrival marked the dawn of a new age, and they would forge a new society from the ashes of the old, restructuring the Tau people in their own image. The new social order, instituted by the ethereals, was a work of strategic genius. Rather than create a new society from whole cloth, they brilliantly harnessed and codified the pre-existing biological specializations that had driven the Tau into the Montau. They took a species on the brink of extinction, shattered by its own divergence, and reforged that very divergence into its greatest strength. This was achieved through the introduction of a single, unifying creed and the imposition of a rigid caste system that eliminated all internal strife by assigning every individual a clear and immutable purpose. The guiding creed was the Tauva, or the greater good. Under this doctrine, the Tau and their allies have little say in their own personal destinies, for by the command of the ethereals, these are subsumed into the single great destiny that they all must serve. It is a philosophy that demands absolute cooperation and unity of purpose for the betterment of all. To enforce this new order, the ethereals formalized the biological divergence that had once torn the Tau apart. They organized Tau society into a rigid caste system, breeding the formerly warring tribes into 4 specific biological archetypes, much as one might refine different dog breeds for specific tasks. Each caste was now bred for a specific function, exhibiting distinct physiological traits that made them perfectly suited for their role. The caste system is the ultimate expression of the Tauva, a society perfectly engineered for a single purpose, tireless expansion. In this structure, individual desire is sacrificed for collective efficiency, and every member of society is a specialized component in a grand, unified machine. The potential of the one is channeled into the advancement of the whole, creating a civilization primed to carry its creed to the stars. The ethereal caste, the On, serve as the undisputed ruling class of the Tau Empire. Their serenely issued edicts are law, and their word is never questioned. They are the supreme leaders and spiritual guides of their people. The fire caste, the Shahs, are the professional soldiers and military mainstay of the empire, trained from birth in the code of fire, disciplined warriors who value honor, reason, and place heavy emphasis on skilled marksmanship under pressure. The earth caste, known as the Theo, are the engineers, scientists, and builders responsible for the rapid technological advancement of the species. The water caste, the poor, are the diplomats, merchants, administrators, and envoys, silver-tongued speakers skilled in negotiation. And the air caste, the core, are the pilots and naval officers bred for life in low or zero gravity, possessing hollow bird-like bones. With these 5 pillars firmly in place, Tau society was perfectly structured and unified, poised for a future that would take them far beyond the confines of their homeworld. The meteoric rise of the Tau stands in stark contrast to the great decaying powers of the galaxy. Unlike the dying feudal empire of the Imperium, or other ancient races who are but a shadow of their former selves, the Tau have relentlessly advanced since the birth of their race. Their society has only ever moved forward. There was no horrendous dark age following a golden age that will never be recreated. Though they have faced setbacks, they have never been fundamentally reset. Their trajectory forever pointed upward. In the span of just a few thousand years, the unification under the ethereals and the creed of the Tauva transformed the Tau from a race of Stone Age barbarians on the brink of self-destruction into a spacefaring empire. This new power, a dynamo of relentless advancement born from strife and remade by an inexplicable miracle, now stands ready to expand its burgeoning realm, poised to bear its light into the grim darkness of the galaxy. The young empire burns with the light of a singular, powerful idea. The Tauva, the greater good. This creed is the very bedrock of Tau society, a unifying doctrine that purports to offer purpose and enlightenment to all who embrace it. Yet beneath the serene surface of this burgeoning stellar power, deep and troubling questions fester. Questions about the nature of free will, the price of unity, and the truth of the absolute, unquestioning loyalty demanded by their ethereal masters. The Tauva is a covenant of cooperative purpose, a grand social contract that demands every individual, and indeed every allied race, subsume their personal destiny into a single great effort. This is a pact for the advancement, protection, and ultimate prosperity of all. It is this profound unity of purpose that allowed the Tau to achieve the impossible, to rise from a race of Stone Age barbarians to a star-spanning empire in the span of a few thousand years, their advancement outstripping even that of the ancient Imperium of Man. But at the heart of this perfect society lies a profound contradiction, embodied by the absolute rule of the ethereal caste. A contradiction that can be viewed through two starkly different lenses. To its adherents, and in the official doctrine of the Empire, Tau society is a monument to willing cooperation. Its citizens and allies are not coerced, but convinced. They follow the edicts of their ethereal leaders not out of fear, but from a genuine recognition of their wisdom and their dedication to the shared destiny of all. This unity is the product of a social and cultural indoctrination so successful, so deeply ingrained, that it has fundamentally reshaped the Tau psyche. The very concept of rebellion against their rulers is alien. Their language itself is incapable of expressing the thought of killing an ethereal. In this light, the greater good is not a cage, but the perfect consensus, the single greatest social achievement in a galaxy defined by unending conflict. But a darker interpretation casts a long and terrible shadow over this utopian vision. This theory argues that the Tau's unity is not a matter of choice, but of ruthless, systematic enforcement. There is compelling evidence that the perfect harmony of the Tau Empire is a lie, a carefully constructed illusion maintained by mechanisms of absolute control. Historical records and battlefield accounts consistently show a disturbing pattern. Tau who are cut off from their ethereals seem to revert to a pre-greater good sense of individuality. They begin to question orders, act on selfish impulse, and abandon the tenets they once held as inviolable truths. This suggests their loyalty is not an innate belief, but a sustained, external influence. For those within the Empire whose faith in the Tauva falters, the methods are even more direct. The existence of re-education camps is a dark reality of the ethereal's intolerance for dissent, a callous instrument of control that strips away individuality and enforces conformity. When viewed through this grim lens, the celebrated advancement of the Tau is not a symptom of enlightenment, but a tragedy built upon a foundation of enslavement. One is forced to ask, does this not make them tragically similar to the mindless minions of the Necrons, or the hive mind of the Tyranids? Yet this empire, built on a foundation of either perfect unity or perfect control, is haunted by a weakness not of the mind, but of the flesh, a profound biological fragility that wages its own war against the greater good. For all their technological prowess and societal ambition, the Tau are haunted by a fundamental biological weakness, their fleeting lifespan. This is not merely a fact of life, but a critical existential threat to a rapidly advancing empire. In a galaxy where millennia-old beings guide ancient factions, the Tau must contend with the constant draining loss of experience, wisdom, and leadership with every passing generation. An empire that learns and adapts so quickly risks forgetting its most valuable lessons with the passing of its greatest minds. The biological constraint is stark. The average Tau lives for a mere 40 standard years. Their society, however, has adapted culturally to this reality with remarkable discipline. They are taught not to view their short lives as a problem to be mourned, but as an opportunity for greatness. Through selfless service, they are promised the chance to live on eternally as part of the enduring legacy of the greater good. Yet behind this cultural acceptance, the brilliant engineers of the Earth caste work tirelessly, employing sophisticated and often dangerous technologies to defy the limitations of their own biology. To preserve invaluable expertise across the ages, the Tau place their most promising individuals into cryogenic stasis, a deep freeze that allows the Empire to save its greatest minds, preserving them for future crises. The Tau also employ sophisticated cloning programs to perpetuate the existence of their most legendary heroes. The celebrated Commander Swordlight, for instance, is in fact the sixth clone of the original warrior, an eternal symbol of continuity and inspiration. Perhaps the most ambitious and horrifying solution is the technology of the engram neurochip. This allows the Tau to download a consciousness into data chips, preserving a mind long after its body has failed. The most famous example is that of the master strategist, Commander Puretide. After he was mortally wounded during the Damocles War, his unparalleled tactical genius was captured in these engrams. His mind, now data, could be implanted into other commanders, allowing them to access his lifetime of experience. The cost of this borrowed genius, however, was pure grim dark horror. When the Ethereals later ordered the forced surgical removal of these engrams, the procedure had devastating side effects. It effectively lobotomized the recipients, reducing decorated war heroes into drooling vegetables, their own minds scoured away by the invasive technology. Through these methods, the Tau defy their biological limits with incredible ingenuity, ensuring their hard-won knowledge endures. Yet the price of this defiance is often appalling, reinforcing a fundamental truth of the 41st millennium, that even for the hopeful and the progressive, every advance comes at a great and horrifying cost. In the cold, unforgiving calculus of galactic conflict, the Tau Empire prosecutes war not as a glorious crusade, but as a regrettable, if necessary, extension of their societal creed of the greater good. Their military doctrine is a direct reflection of this belief, where victory is measured not in the crude currency of territory gained or enemies slain, but in the preservation of life, both their own and, where possible, that of their future subjects. To the uninitiated, their aversion to close-quarters battle may seem like cowardice. To the Tau, it is the highest form of enlightened pragmatism. They see no honor in a bloody, attritional melee when a conflict can be resolved cleanly, efficiently, and from a safe distance. The Tau prosecute war with a cold, systematic logic befitting a star-faring empire, eschewing archaic notions of honor for the clean calculus of victory. Their way of war is a study in efficiency, practicing economies of scale and force with a discipline alien to the galaxy's more brutish powers. Through careful planning and an overwhelming focus on ranged superiority, they strive to minimize their own casualties while maximizing those of the enemy. This is in stark contrast to the dominant tactics of the age, particularly those of the Imperium of Man, whose warriors are often seen as little more than medieval knights in power armor, who would charge headfirst to the fray with a chainsword. The Tau fight with guns, not swords, and with a modern, calculated precision that makes them a unique and formidable force on the battlefield. In the highest archives of the Fire Caste, bound in data slate and whispered in hushed reverence, lie the teachings of a single broken figure, Commander Puretide. He was a crippled sage who had mastered every one of the Tao's martial disciplines, and more besides, an ancient hermit, confined to a hover throne by a shattered spine, who nonetheless forged two opposing, yet perfectly complementary ways of war. They were never merely tactical playbooks. They became foundational pillars, the twin pillars upon which every Tao commander would build their campaigns for millennia to come. Puretide understood what so many warriors never grasp, that victory wears two faces, overwhelming aggression and infinite patience, and that the master of both is the master of all. The Montka is the essence of Tao aggression, defined as a swift, decisive strike. Its purpose is brutally simple: to identify a critical enemy vulnerability and overwhelm it with a sudden, concentrated application of maximum force. It is a doctrine designed to end a conflict with shocking speed, a surgical application of overwhelming firepower that cripples the enemy and shatters their will to fight. This is a way of war mastered by aggressive commanders like the legendary Oshova, whose signature preference for bold, decisive strikes to cripple them in short order made him the undisputed master of the killing blow. In direct opposition to the Montka is the Kauyon, a meticulously planned strategy that champions patience over aggression. Known as the patient hunter, this way of war is an intricate dance of lures, feints, and tactical withdrawals, designed to draw an overconfident enemy into a perfectly prepared killing zone. Where the Montka is a hammer blow, the Kauyon is an elaborate trap, sprung with lethal precision. In the current age, the galaxy is plagued with stagnation. Where ancient technology is revered and true innovation is heresy, the Tao Empire is the solitary beacon of advancement. They have developed and refined their technology with each passing generation, making their dynamism the very engine of their expansion. This ever-evolving arsenal is physical proof of the Tao's adaptive approach to war, a direct counterpoint to the Imperium's veneration of ancient, poorly understood machines. Central to the Tao way of war is the battlesuit, the very embodiment of their relentless drive towards innovation. These advanced weapon platforms combine mobility, resilience, and immense firepower, allowing Tao commanders to execute their strategies with unparalleled flexibility. The versatile XV-8 Crisis battlesuits form the core of rapid response cadres and serve as living symbols of Tao heroism. Warriors like the legendary Commander Bravestorm, entombed in life support systems within a specialized XV-802 Crisis Iridium mantle, continue to serve the greater good long after their bodies have failed. Among these titans of the battlefield stands a truly colossal war machine, the KV-128 Storm Surge. Designated not as a battle suit, but a ballistic suit, it is a ponderous bipedal weapon platform and mobile bastion. These walking gun towers are designed for a single, terrifying purpose: to meet Titan-level threats and dominate the battlefield with blistering volleys of phenomenal firepower. This technological ecosystem is supported by a vast, networked swarm of artificially intelligent drones. These loyal and resilient machines are an indispensable part of the Firecast's arsenal, from marker drones that paint targets for destruction, to selfless shield drones that sacrifice their own chassis to protect their masters, to buzzing clouds of networked drones that act as mobile gun platforms, laying down a hail of pulse fire. While battlesuits may be the iconic image of Tau military might, the foundation of the fire caste is its highly trained infantry and the armored vehicles that support them. The standard Tau soldier is the fire warrior, a professional soldier, trained and equipped to the highest possible standard. Each fire warrior is armed with a pulse rifle, a weapon of such power that it is considered by many Imperial analysts to be perhaps the single best basic infantry weapon in existence. These disciplined troops are transported to the front lines and supported by a fleet of advanced grav tanks. The Devilfish serves as their dedicated armored transport, while the iconic Hammerhead gunship provides devastating anti-armor support with its turret-mounted railgun, a weapon capable of punching through enemy tanks with a single hypersonic shot. The creed of the greater good is one of unity and enlightened pragmatism, and nowhere is this more evident than in the Tau Empire's use of auxiliary forces. The Tau wisely recognize their own inherent weaknesses and do not hesitate to incorporate other species into their empire to compensate for them. Among the most vital of these auxiliaries are the Kroot carnivores. The Tau as a species shy away from physical bloody combat, preferring the cold precision of ranged warfare. The Kroot, however, relish the visceral thrill of the melee. These fierce avian humanoids serve as exceptional scouts and provide the Tau with a crucial and savage close combat capability they otherwise lack. Their skill as ambush predators is legendary. During the war for the Fyra Heights, climbing Imperial guardsmen were horrified as Kroot warbands emerged from caves and rocky hiding places before charging headlong downhill, leaping from rock to crash into their lines in a whirlwind of blades and beaks. For the Kroot, the battle is only the prelude. They have the unique ability to adopt racial characteristics by consuming the flesh of their foes. This bloody gorging on the foe is a form of savage, evolutionary warfare, allowing them to constantly adapt to new threats, a biological counterpoint to the Tau's sterile technological advancement. Though many Tau may be privately repulsed by the aliens' methods, this indispensable role means the Kroot are treated with great respect. They are a necessary savagery in service of a greater purpose. Armed now with both the gleaming weapons of the Earth caste and the blood-stained claws of their Kroot allies, the Tau Empire stood ready, a civilization refined for war, tempered for expansion. But the galaxy does not wait for empires to announce themselves. The first contact between civilizations is rarely a meeting of equals. More often, it is the collision of the utterly ignorant with the overwhelmingly powerful. For the Tau, that moment came not as a declaration or an embassy, but as a sentence of death quietly filed in the vaults of a decrepit, uncaring colossus. A sentence they would not learn of until it was almost too late to escape it. The pitiless expanse of the galaxy is vast, and the birth of a species is rarely noticed. So it was for the Tau. Their first encounter with the Imperium of Man was not a grand meeting of cultures, but a footnote in a logbook, the routine cataloguing of yet another primitive world by a civilization that measured its domains in the millions. The sheer, grinding indifference of the imperial machine is a force of nature in itself, and against it, a species armed with little more than fire and sharpened stone stood no chance at all. In the latter part of the 35th millennium, an exploratory fleet of the Adeptus Mechanicus entered the Tau system. Their records were brief and dismissive. They noted a world fit for human colonization. Its native inhabitants, a fairly innocuous species, who was seen only to have recently begun using simple tools, as well as having learned to make safe fire. From the cold perspective of a 10,000-year-old empire, the Tau were insignificant, their nascent culture little more than a biological obstacle. The protocol was as old as the Imperium itself. The planet was designated a resource world, and its aboriginal population was slated for eradication. There was no malice in this sentence, merely the cold, inhuman logic of imperial expansion. A fleet would be dispatched, the planet would be cleansed, and humanity's footprint would press another world into the dirt. The doom of the Tau was a bureaucratic certainty, a line item in a long and bloody ledger. But the galaxy, in its infinite and violent caprice, intervened. Before the purgation fleets could be mustered, violent warp storms of impossible scale erupted, wrapping the Tau homeworld in an impenetrable shroud of raw chaos. Compounding this cosmic anomaly was the Imperium's own descent into internal conflict during the bloody age of apostasy. Distracted by civil war and crippled by its own labyrinthine bureaucracy, the masters of mankind turned their gaze inward. In the labyrinthine archives of the Administratum, the records of a minor Xenos species and their designated world were archived and forgotten about. This was not salvation. It was a priceless gift. For 6,000 years, the Tau were granted an isolation that no other nascent race in the galaxy could have dreamed of. Shielded by the very storms that should have heralded damnation, they were left alone. In this quiet crucible, safe from the galaxy's horrors and the Imperium's notice, their civilization was allowed to develop entirely unhindered. They evolved, they built, and they reached for the stars, unaware of the sentence that had been passed upon them and the stay of execution the universe had granted. 6 millennia passed in the blink of a galactic eye, and when the storms finally broke, the Imperium would be confronted with a truth far stranger and more dangerous than their forgotten records could ever have foretold. When the warp storms that had blanketed that small corner of space at last receded, the Imperium returned. Their records spoke of a primitive world ripe for colonization, its inhabitants little more than barbarians. They came expecting to find a world theirs for the taking, a simple matter of planetary pacification. What they found instead would ignite a new and bitter war on the eastern fringe. As Imperial probe ships pushed back into the region once known as the Damocles Gulf, their astropaths screamed warnings back to the Segmentum Command. The agents of the Imperium had expected to find, in their own dismissive parlance, primitive barbarians. They found a technologically advanced, star-spanning empire. The primitives they had scheduled for extermination had built a civilization that in a few thousand years had gone from the Stone Age to the stars. The shock was profound. The Imperial response was reflexive and absolute. Surprise and xenophobia are the twin engines of the Imperium's wrath. There were no negotiations, no attempts at understanding. There was only the cold, hard certainty that an alien empire, expanding and confident, had risen on their doorstep. The response was immediate and overwhelming. A full-scale invasion fleet was mustered, the Damocles Gulf Crusade. Its target, the vital Tau-sept world of Daleth. With murderous violence, the fist of the Imperium descended, intending to crush this upstart race and reclaim what they saw as their ordained dominion. But this new empire would not be so easily broken. For in the crucible of their own history, the Tau had forged warriors and commanders of singular brilliance, prodigies who would now be called upon to stand against a foe whose scale and fury were beyond anything their race had ever conceived. The bedrock of the Tau Fire Caste's military tradition was laid by a single, legendary mind, Commander Puretide. A master strategist of unparalleled genius, he was a sage of war, whose teachings would become the shield and sword of his people. As the Imperium's shadow fell across Daleth, it was Puretide's legacy, embodied by his two greatest students, that rose to meet it. They were a study in contrasts, a pair of brilliant commanders, bound together by a shared master and a fierce, abiding rivalry. Leading the defense were Commander Oshova, who would one day be known across the galaxy as Farsight, and Commander Oshasera, the warrior who would become Shadowsun. As aspirants under Puretide, they had developed a deep and abiding rivalry that pushed both of them to ever greater feats of excellence. Each had followed their own path to martial perfection, honing distinct ways of war that would now be tested in the fires of total war. Commander Oshova was the undisputed master of Montka, the killing blow. His was the way of the decisive, overwhelming assault. He was a proponent of bold, aggressive strikes, of identifying a single critical weakness and falling upon it with such speed and concentrated force that the enemy would be crippled in a single, perfectly executed offensive. Commander Oshasera was the peerless practitioner of Kauyon, the patient hunter. Hers was the way of the trap. She was a master of misdirection, feints and ambushes, patiently luring an overconfident enemy into a killing zone that had been prepared to the last detail, turning their aggression and momentum into the very instruments of their own destruction. Upon the purple-grassed plains of Daleth, their rivalry would be forged into a singular, devastating weapon. Here were not two opposing methods, but two perfectly complementary halves of a brilliant defensive strategy inherited from their master. The patient hunter would set the trap. The killing blow would spring it. In a seamless cycle of feint and strike, Oshasera's misdirection would blind the lumbering Imperial war machine, drawing its most powerful assets into the open, and as soon as they were committed, Oshova's battlesuit spearheads would fall upon them from above. This was the true genius of Puretide's teachings made manifest. A fluid, deadly synthesis the monolithic armies of mankind were utterly unprepared to face. The war for the sept world of Daleth was never merely a conflict for territory. It was a violent contest of creeds, a savage debate between two fundamentally opposed visions of existence. On one side stood the Imperium of Man, a galactic juggernaut whose strategy was the inevitable product of 10 millennia of attritional warfare, rigid, overwhelming, and absolute. On the other, the young Tau Empire, a civilization forced by necessity to counter brute strength with adaptive strategy, overwhelming numbers with technological supremacy. The Imperial Crusade arrived as a steamroller of faith and firepower. Endless ranks of the Imperial Guard marched forth from grotesque, oversized dropships, their advance supported by thousands of ponderous tanks that rumbled across the purple-grassed plains. Where precision was required, elite Space Marine strike forces descended from the heavens in armored pods, bringing fanatical fury to the heart of the Tau lines. It was an offensive built on brute force, designed to crush, to overrun, and to grind any opposition into submission. Against this inexorable advance, the Tau could not hope to compete in a conventional war of numbers. For them, technology and discipline were not simply tools of war. They were force multipliers, the very instruments by which they sought to rebalance the scales of existence against a universe defined by brute numbers. In the skies of Daleth, the war was fought for control over the flow of battle. Air supremacy was the key to projecting power, to gathering intelligence, and to dictating the terms of engagement on the plains below. The contest for aerial dominance was a clear display of the technological chasm between the two empires. The Imperium filled the air with crude but rugged craft, thunderbolts, Valkyries, and heavy marauder bombers, relying on sheer numbers and armor to punch through to their targets. Against them rose the sleek, sophisticated aircraft of the Tau Air Caste. Squadrons of Barracuda, Tiger Shark, and Razor Shark fighters lifted from the hidden panels of Daleth's hexadomes, their advanced sensor suites immediately linking into a single, cohesive network. The Imperial approach of overwhelming the sky with individual, rugged craft was systematically dismantled by the Tau's superior cooperation. Each Tau fighter acted as a node in a thinking, networked weapon that turned the sky itself into a killing ground. Weaving a deadly matrix of supporting data, they formed staggered picket lines that hunted the less advanced Imperial flyers relentlessly. Marauder bombers, unable to outrun the bow wave of the Tau sky lattice, had their rudimentary wings burned from their bodies. The fat frames of Valkyrie transports were punctured by torrents of ion fire from Razor Sharks, sending them spiraling in flames to the ground. Though the Tau largely won the war in the air, the conflict raging on the purple-grassed plains below was a far more grinding and uncertain affair. On the ground, the war became a direct clash of martial traditions. The Imperium advanced as a single, monolithic behemoth, a grinding wall of armor and soldiery that sought to bulldoze its way to victory. The Tau, led by the brilliant students of the legendary Commander Puretide, responded with a fluid, two-pronged strategy that turned the Imperium's greatest strength into its most exploitable weakness. The first prong was the way of the patient hunter, the Kauyon, masterfully executed by Commander Shadowsun. Her XV-25 stealth cadres operated under the cover of darkness, using infiltration and misdirection to set the perfect trap. Her teams blinded the lumbering Imperial columns with bursts of multispectral light, overloading their primitive vision sensors and plunging them into confusion. As carefully placed tank kills hemmed in the armored companies, Shadowsun's forces would melt back into the shadows, leaving their prey disoriented, compromised, and vulnerable. The second prong was the killing blow, the Montka, delivered by Commander Farsight. As Imperial strike forces raced to intercept the ghost signals left by Shadowsun's teams, Farsight's battlesuit spearheads would descend from above. Crisis teams fell upon the now exposed enemy, crippling their transports with devastating fire from broadside battlesuits. The stranded Space Marines, forced to fight without their armored support, were met by Farsight's cadres in a series of deadly, close-quarters battles. The siege of Ralatus was a microcosm of the entire war on Daleth, a perfect demonstration of Tau ingenuity against the brute force of the Imperium. With the Tau's most capable commanders engaged elsewhere, an Imperial force descended upon the domed city, famous for its sculptures of living light. Within hours, Ralatus was surrounded by over 1,000 Imperial battle tanks, their guns aimed at the city walls. The city's small garrison of fire warriors was hopelessly outmatched. Just as the Imperial armor breached the walls and began to barge into the city's perimeter, the Tau counterattack was unleashed. It came not as a wave of plasma fire, but as a silent, invisible tide of energy. A massive EMP tidal wave washed over the battlefield, scrambling the cogitators of every Imperial tank and walker within a mile of the city. In an instant, 1,000 instruments of war were reduced to inert metal coffins. The Tau had not fought the armored column, they had simply turned it off. In the deafening silence that followed, the true horror of the Tau's trap was revealed. From every breach and shattered gateway, masked Kroot carnivore squads poured out, bounding and leaping toward the disabled war machines. They swarmed the silenced tanks, ripping open hatches and doors with their bare hands, and allowing their ferocious kin to climb inside for a grisly feast. Despite a string of tactical victories born of technological superiority and strategic genius, the Tau were facing the harsh arithmetic of a war of attrition. For every tank they destroyed, the Imperium deployed another. For every soldier they killed, 10 more seemed to take their place. Their greatest weakness, their limited numbers, was being systematically exploited by the sheer, unending mass of the Imperium. Half of Dalith had been abandoned or reduced to smoking rubble, and the Tau was slowly being bled dry. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, the Imperial Crusade withdrew. They did not retreat in defeat. They simply left, abandoning a war they were slowly but surely winning. The withdrawal was perplexing, a strange and anticlimactic end to such a violent conflict. The revelation struck the Tau like a lance through the heart of their certainty. Their confidence in martial prowess, in technological supremacy, in the righteousness of their cause, all of it trembled. The very notion of their natural supremacy in the universe had been shaken to its core. They had survived the Damocles crusade not through ultimate strength or a superior creed, but by the sheer, horrifying indifference of an impossibly vast and hostile galaxy. What had been for the Tau a struggle for their very soul was, for the Imperium, a footnote in a ledger of countless greater wars. A border dispute concluded not by victory or defeat, but by the casual, cosmic indifference of a true galactic power. The chilling truth, uncovered by watercast ambassadors, was this. The apocalyptic war the Tau had barely survived, the greatest trial in their empire's history, had been waged by but the merest fraction of the Imperium's true might. The crusade had not been defeated, but redeployed to face an even greater galactic threat, the ravenous tyrannids of Hive Fleet Behemoth. The silence that followed the Imperium's withdrawal was not peace. It was the silence of a species staring into an abyss it had never known existed. For all their victories, for all the enemy dead choking the purple plains of Dalith, the Tau now understood a truth that would haunt them for generations. They had not won. They had merely been overlooked. And in that knowing, a fracture appeared. Not in their battle lines, but in their faith. If the greater good was destined to triumph, why had destiny itself seemed so utterly indifferent to their survival? It was a question that demanded an answer, and the ethereals would provide one, no matter the cost. In the wake of the Damocles crusade, a profound disquiet settled over the Tau Empire. The blood-soaked war against the Imperium of Man had not been a simple victory. It was a scar. The foundational Tau notion of their own natural supremacy had been shaken to its core. This crisis of faith was a threat more potent than any human fleet, a sentiment perceived with chilling clarity by the master of the undying spirit, ethereal Anva. He saw that the Tau people's faith in their manifest destiny was beginning to show cracks, a spiritual decay that, if left unchecked, could cause the entire empire to falter and die. A powerful remedy was required, an icon to rekindle the fire of their ambition. In response, Anvar initiated a sweeping propaganda campaign across the whole of the Tau Empire. With the persuasive arts of the watercast as his tools, he took the decorated hero of the Damocles Crusade, Commander Oshova, and began a process of deliberate mythologizing. Oshova was methodically elevated from the status of hero to that of a vaunted savior, his military successes transformed into oft-told legends that echoed through every sphere of Tau society. The scale of this deification was immense and unmistakable. Across the worlds of the First Sphere, in every major battle dome, pod complex and naval harbor, great monuments rose. Statues to Farsight's greatness became silent, ever-present testaments to the new legend being forged in the heart of the Empire. Having crafted his icon, Anvar set him to his purpose. He implored the aging ethereal supreme, Anwei, whose days were drawing to a close, to launch a grand expeditionary force. Anwei saw the wisdom in Anvar's words and acquiesced. The mission, to reclaim the worlds lost across the Damocles Gulf, and to push the borders of the Empire further than ever before. To lead this glorious reconquest, Anvar appointed the newly anointed hero of the people, Commander Oshova. The Tau would head back out into the stars, their optimism and self-belief rekindled by the finest military mind of their time. But the quest to reforge an empire's faith would not begin amongst the star fire of glorious conquest. Its first chapter would be written in blood and rust upon the forgotten canvas of a single, dying world. Arkunasha was an oxide desert, a graveyard of a forgotten empire where the dunes, in time, would run with rivers of blood. It was here that Commander Oshova would face his first true command. During their preliminary investigations, the Earthcast had made a disturbing discovery. The endless rust was not natural. It was the dust of a dead civilization, a world once entirely covered in metal structures, now ground into an ocean of endless red sand. The initial Tau colonists, in their naive sophistication, had dismissed the planet's atmospheric peculiarities as barbaric folklore. The ethereals had even forbidden such terms, but a far more tangible barbarism was already encroaching upon their biodomes, a tide of green-skinned fury that called itself Orc. Drone scans confirmed what fearful rumors had suggested. The individual greenskins testing their defenses were slowly getting bigger. These were not simple primitives. All attempts by the Watercast to communicate or broker terms were met with savage, unthinking violence. The diplomats were at a loss. All the greenskins seemed to want to do was fight. In his pre-battle meditations, Oshova found that he could relate to that concept. For far too long, he had practiced the art of war only in simulations, or languished in the sterile limbo of interstellar travel. In his heart, the young commander relished the thought of once more risking his life for the greater good. On Arkunasha, Farsight's genius was not born of simple firepower, but of a deep and obsessive analysis of his enemy. He did not merely fight the orcs. He sought to master their psyche and turn their own brutish nature against them. He would spend hours poring over intercepted orc messages and drone recordings within his disc-shaped mobile headquarters. He learned to decipher their crude glyphs and feral patterns of behavior, becoming so adept that he could tell his aides what would happen in a recording before the event unfolded. It was this uncanny ability that led his command staff to grant him a new moniker, Oshova, the far-sighted one. The most potent application of this knowledge was a subtle but devastating campaign of psychological warfare. Oshova's Earthcast allies cut audio snippets of orc challenges and insults from the recordings and broadcast them across the comms network the invaders had looted. By delivering the right orc insult at the right time, Oshova drove a wedge of dissent between every clan and tribe roaming the desert. Tau strikes would fade into the swirling dust, only for the orcs to immediately turn on one another, erupting into furious brawls over phantom insults engineered by an enemy they could not see. This new understanding also forged new tactics on the battlefield. To counter the orcs' ferocious charges, Farsight's cadres adopted a dangerous, close-quarters method. They would hold their ground, unleashing overlapping fire before blinding the surviving greenskins with photon grenades and finishing them at point-blank range, sometimes even clubbing them to death with the barrels of their pulse rifles. This savage, aggressive strategy put flame in the bellies of his warriors. His pupils embraced it with zeal, none more so than the combative Commander Brightsword, cementing a new code of all-out attack that set the stage for what should have been their final victory. The campaign was turning. Farsight's deep understanding of the orc psyche had given his forces the upper hand. The greenskin hordes, though still vast and dangerous, were being masterfully outmaneuvered, their primitive aggression turned against them at every turn. Oshova was on the path to victory, grinding down a foe that had seemed numberless. It was at this moment that the ethereal High Council intervened. A senior ethereal, Aeoni, arrived on the front lines. With an unnerving calm that stood in stark contrast to the war raging across the planet, he explained the High Council's decision, guided by the wisdom of Anvar himself. The Firecast were to cease their attacks. There would be no more killing blows. They were to withdraw entirely from Arkunasha. Farsight nodded curtly and bowed low in obeisance. Outwardly, he was the image of perfect loyalty. He silenced his own pupils, like the strident Brightsword who called for revenge for their fallen comrades. The law of the ethereals must be observed, Oshova replied, regardless of circumstance or opinion. To the letter, he enacted the council's plan. He consolidated the remaining Tau colonists atop the Argat Plateau, and for the course of an entire year, defended the natural fortress while the evacuation took place. It was a prolonged, a bloody, fighting withdrawal. And during that year of relentless battle, Oshova proved the ethereals wrong. He continued to systematically target the Orc command structure, prioritize the deaths of their leaders, and pitilessly exterminated any who broke through his cordons until the greenskin hordes had ground themselves to pieces against his defenses, and the valleys below were choked with corpses. As his flagship departed the system, he stood in the view dome of his quarters, watching the red dot of Arkunasha recede into the void, the planet for which thousands of his warriors had died. Though his voice had been steady and his actions resolute, the words had felt like ashes in his mouth. In a secret part of his soul, a great disquiet stirred. How could the Tau abandon the planet just when victory was finally in their grasp? He was a simple commander, he told himself, unable to appreciate the full scale of the High Council's plans. But for the first time in his life, in the cold silence between uncaring stars, a seed of undeniable doubt had been planted in the infallible wisdom of the ethereals. It was not a question of strategy, but of faith. And for the first time, Oshova's was shaken. The trail of the orc, pursued for a bitter decade, ended at Arthas Moloch, a world that had died long before the first Tau looked to the stars. As Commander Farsight's forces made planetfall, they entered a realm as grey and desolate as a tomb. Here, life had no purchase. Not a single green shoot breached the barren crust, and the cracked surface was a jumble of thousands of tumbled-down shrines and strange, faceless statues. An eerie silence hung over the ruins, a profound stillness that spoke not of peace, but of an ancient, forgotten death. Farsight's warriors were not conquerors here. They were trespassers in a gallery of ghosts. Amidst the silent ruins, they discovered a great star altar. As the Tau investigated the alien structure, a crackling disk of light tore open the fabric of the sky above. From this impossible gateway erupted a tide of crimson-skinned beasts wielding blazing swords. Their powers were a blasphemy against the known laws of physics. A stream of multicolored flames turned Tau warriors and stone alike into statues of screaming bone. The horror was compounded as more winged beasts burst from the disk, some feathered, others with bat-like wings that drizzled gore upon the combatants below. For the Tau, whose understanding of the universe was built on logic and order, this was an unprecedented sacrilege. It was an event that tore the veil from Farsight's understanding of the universe. In the brutal, swirling melee, all three of his ethereal advisors were slain. One, ethereal Aeonlos, was cut in two from crown to groin. As his spiritual guides lay butchered, Farsight looked back at the shimmering portal. He saw not a mere gateway, but a rip in the fabric of reality itself, a titanic void that had torn the heart out of the galaxy. Within it writhed 1 trillion deaths, each calling out to him by name. In that moment, the entire foundation of his society, the absolute wisdom and truthfulness of the ethereals, was revealed as a monumental lie. He had witnessed a danger far greater than any orc or human, a hostile dimension the ethereals knew of, yet had deliberately hidden from their people. The ordered, secular and rational worldview of the Tau was shattered, replaced by the horrifying realization of a betrayal that poisoned everything he had ever fought for. In the chaos, Farsight fought his way to where a strange blade lay propped up against a fallen statue. He took it up and swung it at one of the capering beasts. What Oshova could not have known was the grim secret of the weapon he now wielded. The Dawn Blade, as it was known, had been fashioned from chronophagic alloys. It possessed a dark and monstrous function. Whenever its wielder cuts a life short with it, the natural span stolen from the victim is added to the wielder's own. In his desperation, Oshova had just bound himself to an artifact that would grant him a lifespan far beyond any of his kind, purchasing centuries of life with the blood of his enemies. The tragedy on Arthas Moloch was the point of schism. With his ethereal guides dead, and his faith in their leadership irrevocably broken, Commander Farsight's sacred bond to the High Council was shattered. Renouncing his allegiance, Oshova issued a momentous act of defiance. He ignored the direct orders to return to the Tau Empire, and instead established the worlds his expedition had reclaimed as an autonomous collective. This new domain would be known as the Farsight Enclaves. Though severed from the Empire, they would not abandon its founding principles. Here, the caste factions would still aid one another according to the tenets of the Tauva. From the heart of the Empire, the newly ascended ethereal Supreme Anva unleashed the full weight of his authority, moving to systematically destroy the hero he himself had created. Oshova was branded a dangerous rebel, a heretic, whose name was to be expunged from the annals of their people. A systematic erasure began. All monuments to Farsight's glory were reduced to rubble, and all mention of him was erased from history. The entire region of space he now occupied on the far side of the Damocles Gulf was officially renamed the Forbidden Zone, declared off limits to all within the Empire. But a decree could not erase a truth sealed in blood and revelation. On the far side of the Damocles Gulf, beyond the reach of Anvar's condemnation, the Farsight enclaves continued to forge their worlds. While the Empire condemned them as traitors, lost in a forbidden zone, they endured as survivors, guardians of a forbidden knowledge. They did not just survive, they thrived. There, in the silence of their self-imposed exile, stand the red-armored warriors of Commander Farsight. Their armor, a permanent mark of the slaughter on Arthas Moloch, forever distinguishing them from the naive empire they left behind. In the accounts of the Tau Empire's third sphere of expansion, one conquest stands apart. The taking of Taros was more than a simple military victory. It was the consummate expression of Tau's strategic thought made manifest. It was a campaign won not through overwhelming force, but through the patient and meticulous application of cold logic, a victory that would validate the Tau way of war, and instill in them a confidence that would one day prove their undoing. The first phase was not a military operation, but a masterclass in subtlety conducted over 2 decades. Rather than committing the Firecast to a costly invasion, the Ethereal Council dispatched agents of the Watercast. With serene patience, these diplomats identified and exploited the avarice of Taros's human merchant guildmasters, initiating secret trade deals that exchanged advanced Tau technology for the planet's mineral wealth. For almost 20 years, the Watercast quietly established an economic and political foothold, while the Imperium's administratum remained blissfully ignorant. When the deception was finally uncovered, the Imperium responded as Tau doctrine predicted it would, with artless, brute force aggression. It was this predictability that proved to be its undoing. The campaign's commander, Shas O Rimir, saw in the lumbering Imperial war machine not a terrifying foe, but a blunt instrument, perfect for dismantlement. He would counter its might not with equal force, but with superior intellect. In a masterful display of Kauyon, the way of the patient hunter, Commander Rimir ceded the very ground the Imperium sought to conquer. He presented the Imperial Guard with an undefended coastline and silent deserts, a vacuum that their aggressive nature compelled them to fill. As the offensive continued to grind forwards through the desert, the Imperial columns consisting of large processions of Lehman Russ tanks and chimeras pushed ever deeper, blind to the fact that the battlefield itself was the cage, and they were willingly locking themselves inside. This maneuver was precisely calculated to exploit the Imperium's greatest strategic vulnerability, its massively overextended and fragile supply lines. Far from their landing zones, the Imperial regiments became utterly dependent on a constant flow of ammunition, fuel, and most critically, water. With the trap sprung, Rimir initiated the second phase, Montka, the killing blow. This was not a frontal assault, but a series of precise surgical strikes against the enemy's exposed rear echelons. Mobile hunter cadres, supported by stealth suit teams, launched raids on the vulnerable supply columns, threading their way across the wastes. These attacks were designed to starve the Imperial war machine. By destroying tankers of water and fuel, the Tau crippled the guards' ability to fight, turning the harsh desert itself into their most effective weapon. The result was a total collapse of the Imperial war effort. Stranded, dehydrated, and out of fuel, the once mighty regiments were rendered combat ineffective, without ever facing the main Tau army. The Imperial High Command was left with no option but to order a humiliating evacuation. This was evidence to the supremacy of logic, a clean and devastating victory that would instill a dangerous intellectual overconfidence in the Tau way of war, a confidence that would soon be shattered by events that reason could neither comprehend nor conquer. Where the victory at Taros reinforced the Tau belief that any problem could be solved with reason, the Fourth Sphere's passage through the star-tied nexus served as its cold refutation. This was not a new frontier to be enlightened by the greater good, but a threshold into a realm of madness. It was a region of profound horror that would fundamentally challenge the Tau's rational worldview, revealing that their greatest strength, their unwavering faith in scientific materialism, was also their greatest vulnerability. The first challenge to their understanding was biological. As Tau forces engaged local defenders, Earth-caste scientists conducting autopsies made a horrifying discovery. They found not just humans, but what their reports described as monstrous hybrids of human and tyrannid genetic strands. The existence of these gene-stealer cults was a biological impossibility that defied all Tau genetics. The rational conclusion was swift. This anomaly was not to be studied, but to be destroyed with extreme prejudice. More insidious, however, was the madness that manifested within their own ranks. The Gueveza, once seen as proof of the greater good's universal appeal, began to suffer from outbreaks of violent insanity. Their brutality toward the enemy grew to intolerable heights, with widespread reports of torture and ritualistic mutilation of the dead. This internal corruption proved to be a threat that Tau firepower could not counter and Tau logic could not define. An enemy they could not quantify was an enemy they could not truly fight. The situation became so dire that Commander Shadowsun, a paragon of Tau pragmatism, was forced to withdraw all Gavesa forces from the front lines. It was a stark and unprecedented admission of defeat, not by a superior weapon or strategy, but by an encroaching madness that rotted the very soul. The Farsight enclaves are a symbol to defiance. An autonomous collective, born from a schism with the Tau Empire, they are a pocket of independence in a cosmos that despises such things. Their spirit is unyielding, but their domain is small. A handful of star systems, adrift in an ocean of potential threats. This isolation, once a source of pride, would soon become the crucible of their greatest trial, for an existential threat had arrived, unannounced and ravenous, at their very doorstep. It began over Violos, the most populous world of the Enclaves, and Commander Farsight's own seat of power. Without warning, the skies turned a sickly purple-grey as a tyrannid splinter fleet blotted out the stars. A grotesque hail of mycetic spores rained down upon the world, a biological vanguard that warped the planet's flora into horrible new shapes. The intent of this alien intelligence was terrifyingly clear. It was not merely conquering the planet, but fattening it like a crop intended for the feast. The invaders were coming to feed, and the people of Violos were the harvest. The initial assault was overwhelming, a biological tide that crashed against the Enclave's defenses with irresistible force. Conventional Tau tactics, even those masterminded by the ancient and legendary Commander Farsight, proved tragically insufficient. Farsight, longer lived than any fire-cast warrior before him, coordinated a desperate war effort that hinged upon aerial supremacy, dispatching his elite crisis battlesuit teams to sweep the skies of winged horrors. Yet for every creature they blasted from the air, 1,000 more scuttled and swarmed across the plains below. The sheer, unending mass of the Tyrannid swarm ground down Farsight's armies, rendering their advanced technology and disciplined strategies moot. His world was being devoured, and his war machine was breaking. There comes a point where the cost of conventional victory becomes indistinguishable from defeat. It is at this precipice that the most desperate solutions are born, where creeds are tested and broken. For the Tau of the Farsight enclaves, whose entire way of war was built upon the economies of scale and force, and the principle of minimizing their own casualties, this moment had arrived. The covenant of the greater good was about to be pushed to its absolute breaking point. The architect of this final gambit was a wizened scientist named Ovesa, an old Earth-caste colleague of Farsight, and a member of his revered inner circle, the Eight. Ovesa was a figure of immense intellect and loyalty. The bond between them was uniquely profound. Given that Commander Farsight is a die-hard Firecast traditionalist, it speaks to the depth of their trust that he allowed Ovesa, a member of another caste entirely, the great honor of piloting a powerful XV-104 Riptide battlesuit. It was to this brilliant mind that Farsight turned when firepower and strategy had failed. He and his colleagues were evacuated to the Fiorotl research facility, a final bastion of hope deep in the Valley of Dust, tasked with devising a miracle. The final solution Ovesa conceived was not a new bomb or a more powerful cannon. It was a biological countermeasure born of utter desperation. Working night and day with samples of Xeno's biomass, the scientists did not craft a weapon to be fired, but a poison to be willingly consumed. This was a perversion of their science, turning the life-giving knowledge of the Earthcast into a tool of mass, strategic suicide. The plan was as elegant as it was grotesque. The ultimate weapon would be their own bodies, offered up to the swarm as a final, poisoned meal. The act itself was a violation of Tau ideals. To willingly sacrifice the most brilliant scientific minds of the Enclaves, to use their very bodies as a delivery mechanism for a bioweapon, was a concept antithetical to their entire way of war. Yet, it was the only path that remained. In the sterile confines of the Deep Earth laboratory, with the planet groaning under the weight of the swarm above, the scientists made their final preparations. Drawing upon their unparalleled knowledge, Ovesa and his colleagues formulated a suite of self-replicating poisons and necrotizing agents. These were complex bacterial vectors, engineered with a singular destructive purpose. With their work complete, they performed their final service to the Enclaves. In a quiet, solemn ceremony, far from the roar of battle, the Earth-caste scientists imbibed the poisons as their last act, knowing their next and final purpose was to be consumed by the enemy. The genius of their trap lay in its subtlety. The poisons were designed for a time-delayed release, ensuring they would remain inert until they had reached the very heart of the hive fleet. The scientists knew their bodies would be broken down in the core digestion pools of the Tyrannid bioships. Only then once they were part of the very substance of the Hive fleet, would the bacterial codes they had locked within themselves activate. The Tyranids, in their insatiable hunger, would become the instruments of their own destruction. From the cold void of high orbit, Commander Farsight and his surviving commanders could only watch. The fighting on Viorlos had ceased. The evacuation was complete. Below them, the swarm stripped the world of every last shred of biomass, the great bioships sucking up the rendered slurry of a conquered world. There was an eerie stillness to the final act of consumption, a vile spectacle that twisted the guts of the veteran commander. The fate of his people now rested entirely on a hidden biological time bomb, a final desperate prayer encoded in poison. Then it began. The change was as sudden as it was grotesque. As Farsight watched, the fleshy Tyranid vessels fell into themselves, rotting and falling away like a piece of fruit, decomposing in a matter of seconds. One by one, the colossal bioships imploded, their organic hulls disintegrating into nothingness. The very air around them, which the Tyranids had stripped from Viorlos to fuel their conquests, had been turned into a vector for the necrotizing agents. Within the hour, the entire splinter fleet was gone, reduced to a cloud of decomposing matter. The relief was profound, but it was a victory steeped in horror. As Ovasa's final recorded message explained the mechanics of the trap, Farsight was overcome. This singular act of sacrifice had moved Farsight on a deep level. The commander now owed his life and the survival of his people to the cold, calculated self-destruction of his old colleague. In that moment, Ovasa, the wizened scientist, had earned his commander's eternal and profound respect. The enclaves were saved, but this rotting victory carried with it a chilling revelation about the universe and the price of survival within it. The trial of Viorlos was over. The victory was total, and it was also an education written in poison and rot. In their defiance, the Tau of the Farsight enclaves had been forced to confront a foe that could not be reasoned with, outmaneuvered, or overcome with conventional force. They had survived only by embracing a tactic so savage and self-destructive that it would forever haunt the memory of their people. For all their technological brilliance and ideological ambition, the Tau remained but a flickering flame in a vast and ancient darkness. They possess a distinct lack of understanding of the galaxy. Their burgeoning empire built upon a naivety that is both their strength and their greatest vulnerability. Viorlos confirmed what the cosmos had always known, that the Tau are in the dark about just how awful the galaxy truly is, and just how far out of their league they often are. There are moments that serve as turning points, fulcrums upon which the destiny of an entire species pivots. For the Tau Empire, a civilization built on the unshakable foundations of logic, progress, and a unifying philosophy of the greater good, that moment was the fifth sphere of expansion. This was not to be another glorious conquest, another testament to their inexorable rise. Instead, it was a brutal, scarring education. It was the moment a young and hopeful race, in all its technological confidence, was forced to stare into the abyss of a fundamentally illogical galaxy and confront the maddening, supernatural horrors that stared back. The fifth sphere of expansion launched with the full might and optimism of the Empire at its back. Fleets surged through the Startide Nexus, a stable wormhole that would be their gateway to a new frontier. They were met not by unenlightened worlds waiting for salvation, but by the fleet of the Death Guard, the traitor legion of the plague god Nurgle. What ensued was a war between irreconcilable realities. Under the command of the legendary commander Shadowsun, the Tau waged a war of sterile technology and clean lines against a foe of supernatural filth and incomprehensible disease. Sleek battlesuits and precise pulse fire were pitted against bloated plague ships that wept contagion and unnatural plagues that defied all scientific understanding. The conflict was a bloody stalemate. The Tau, through tactical genius and technological superiority, managed to halt the Death Guard's advance, but they could not achieve a decisive victory. While many of the plague ships were destroyed, a great many escaped, peeling away from the battlefield like a bandage from a still seeping wound. Worse, some of the enemy fleet had burrowed deep into the fabric of the Startide Nexus itself, leaving a permanent, festering corruption at the very gateway to the Tau's new territory. The new colonies of the Fifth Sphere were not a foothold in a new age of prosperity. They were an island, established deep within what had once been Imperial territory, beyond the Damocles Gulf and across the galaxy from their empire's heartlands. This new frontier was a lone bastion of Tau ambition, surrounded on all sides by a hostile, fate-driven, and utterly alien ocean of stars. The reality of their isolation was soon made clear in the Chalnath Expanse, where the Tau's expansion efforts collapsed into a brutal, three-way meat grinder of a war. Here, their core tenets of diplomacy and technological supremacy were tested to their absolute limits against foes who could not be reasoned with. The Sisters of Battle became the embodiment of the Imperium's fanatical, supernatural faith. They fought with a zeal that defied logic, and Tau auxiliaries brought back hushed reports of battlefield miracles that flew in the face of all scientific explanation. A power the Tau's rational mindset struggled to comprehend, let alone counter. Even more insidious were the gene-stealer cults. In these human populations, the Tau discovered monstrous hybrids of human and tyrannid DNA, rising up in worship of their star children. These cults operated with a terrifying blend of subversive tactics and their own debased faith. They turned the Tau's own methods of infiltration and indoctrination against them, representing a biological and ideological corruption that threatened to undermine the greater good from within. Locked in a war of attrition against both fanatical zealotry and insidious biological horror, the Tau found that their advanced technology and diplomatic overtures were not enough. The conflict in the Chalnath Expanse became a grim lesson that in this dark galaxy some truths cannot be debated, only fought and died for. The Tau Empire reached its technological apex on the eve of the Fifth Sphere expansion, a unified civilization poised to bring its enlightened vision to the stars. What awaited them instead was a series of truths so stark, so violent, that they shattered the very foundations upon which their certainty had been built. Now the Empire stands divided. Its newest and most ambitious colonies are isolated across the galaxy, a vulnerable island in a sea of enemies. Its core tenets of logic and relentless advancement have been proven insufficient against the illogical horrors of plague, the supernatural power of faith, and the insidious corruption of alien biology. And on all fronts, it is besieged, locked in unending wars against foes it can barely comprehend, let alone reason with. For the Tau, the age of optimism is over. Their expansion is no longer a matter of serene advancement and inevitable enlightenment. They are no longer bringing a benevolent light to the darkness between the stars. They are now just another power, fighting desperately to hold back the encroaching dark. If you're still listening, thank you. I sincerely hope that you enjoyed this video. Although I'm exercising my willpower to stop myself from acquiring a second army for the tabletop, reading so much of the Tau lore has left me with a Commander Farsight-sized hole in my wallet. Anyway, I'm really enjoying getting to learn in depth about all the factions in this universe, so please let me know which factions or stories you'd like to see narrated next. As always, I am incredibly thankful for your viewership and support. If you did enjoy the video, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you'd like to support me directly, you can do so via my Ko-fi page, either with a small donation or purchasing some of my artworks. Please also consider using the channel affiliate links if you are planning to make a hobby purchase. Thanks again, and I wish you a good day or a good night.